I appreciate the faith. Hey, good evening. I'm Scott. I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ. I'm in recovery from sex addiction and compulsive overeating. Hey, I'm glad you guys are here tonight. Man, my last 24 hours sum up the title of our message today, which is Keeping Serenity When the World Around You Seems So Insane. And that's how I felt the last 24 hours. And that's what I want to talk about really to start off. Is next week, what are we going to do? What happens to Celebrate Recovery? What happens to our recovery? What happens to our open share groups? What happens to those things when the government and the governing authorities around us say certain things? Great question, Scott. So here's what we're doing. This is our action plan. I'm going to share out a video tomorrow on Facebook that will go over the details of this, but we're just going to move everything outside. We're just going to take what we do in here, and we're going to move it outside. So next week, when you guys show up for 5:30 barbecue, we're going to still be outside because it's outside, yeah. We're going to eat hot dogs again and some chips and soda and maybe branch out to some hamburgers. I don't know. We're going to have a great time, and we're going to fellowship. It was awesome to sit down with somebody else and have a meal and be able to talk with them. It was really a great time. And then we're going to do our large group time, and out there underneath the pine tree, there's going to be a stage set up, and there's going to be speakers out there, and that's where we're going to have our worship time, and that's where we're going to have our testimony next week. And we're going to have chairs that are already out there, but don't count on those chairs. Just letting you know. Come on, you guys are addicts, and it was BYOB at one point in your life, and now it's BYOC. Bring your own chair, right? So that's what you need to be doing, is bring in your own chair so you guys can make sure you have a seat, because there's some people that like to get here early and camp out and get the good seats. And so I encourage you, bring that chair and set it up and be ready for that time. And we're going to do our service out there. It'll be awesome. It'll be nicely shaded out there. You can see it's under the sails, all that kind of stuff. And then after our large group time, we're going to have our open share group time, but we can't go to our normal rooms. So tonight, why it's always awkward after I teach to go into open share group, because then everyone's like, Scott, you really did this great job. And then they share their point. And I'm like, this is weird. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and I'm going to walk around campus, and I'm going to make sure I have all the good spots for us that have shade, so that next week we know what spots our open share groups will be at. And I've already kind of got it laid out and stuff. And what we'll do is we'll have a number on a usher sign, and we'll just have you got different groups go to those different numbers, and we'll unfold it all next week. But you'll go to that group, and there's about 4 or 5 groups that will be over on this side of the building, and then out on the grass field where the elementary is, where there is no shade. That's where we're putting all the guys. So you're welcome, guys. But no, we're gonna spot out as many shady spots as we can around campus and let you guys know, inform you guys, so that way we have groups that are gonna meet outside. Now, again, one of the values we have here is safety. And anonymity, confidentiality kind of comes into the play. And so if you're like me and you have a loud voice and it's your time to share, just be wise in how you share. Just maybe whisper, bring it down a notch. And maybe share a little quieter. But basically, we're going to try and spread it out so that we all can be safe and we all know exactly where our groups are and all that kind of stuff. But we're going to hold that outside, and then we'll gather again for maybe dessert out on the patio. And so that's kind of what we're doing next week and moving forward, as I don't think this is a 1 to 2 week situation. I think this is going to be more long-term than what I would like it to be. And so I encourage us to do what we can. Now, what's difficult for me is the fact that when things are out of control, when things are told for me to do certain things, like when my mom would tell me to clean my room, I'd get mad. I know it's dirty, I know it needs to be cleaned, but man, I don't like the fact you just told me. And so when the governor comes and says something, I have to fight against the way that I feel inside, and that's anger. And so we want to, at some level, be very respectful of those that may be living in fear right now, that may be struggling with the virus and maybe believing some of those extreme shares. And we want to be respectful of them and help them not live in fear, but also honor the fact that of what they're dealing with. And then we also don't want to be flippant, and we want to help those that are maybe a little bit more flippant, a little bit more rebellious, like I tend to be in my nature, and stick it to the man idea, and we don't want to do that. And so it's tough to find that fine line, and we want to be respectful and do everything we can to maintain our social distancing and everything we can to honor God through this process. And so I encourage you during this time that we do whatever we possibly can, because worst case scenario, we get shut down. Somebody can really ruin things a lot. I have a buddy that's a pastor, and he had somebody that was exposed to coronavirus and then showed up to church on Sunday, and they've got to shut the whole entire church down, just like that. And so we just got to be mindful if you have any symptoms, if you have been exposed, to stay away, to make sure that you're getting that stuff taken care of prior to showing up here on campus for that. And I just encourage you with that. But I remember yesterday, I was sitting at Jimmy John's outside with an accountability group that I meet with, and we're sitting there talking, and we met at 12:15, and so we're sitting there chatting, eating our Jimmy John's, hanging out, going over our accountability questions, and all of a sudden, at some point in that meal, my phone starts to blow up. Like, it starts text message, and I have the Homer Simpson sound for my text message, so it's all, don't, and they're like, dude, somebody wants to get a hold of you. And I'm like, I know, this is crazy. So I silenced it, and I peeked at the thing, and I about dropped a bad word in the middle of accountability group, which isn't great, and I'm sitting there going, what is happening to our society? What is going on? And I, at that time, found out what our governor had said and how he shut down the gyms, and I was really upset for my son who loves to go work out. He's very upset. Now he just has to do push-ups at home and stuff like that. So I'm sorry. You can find a beam and do some pull-ups or something. I don't know. But I'm just sitting there upset. And do we have that video? This is how I felt. Like I needed something like this.
Serenity now! 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 Hochi Mama!
I love Seinfeld, and there's those episodes where he had this belief, serenity now. His world around him was going crazy, and he had to yell out, serenity now. And that's how I was feeling at that moment is, what do I do? How do I maintain my serenity when the world around me seems to be going bonkers? What do I do to do that? And I, all afternoon yesterday and into the evening, kept going back to one thing. And that thing was my serenity prayer. The things that I've learned in here, the things that we say at the end of every single meeting, I went right back to those moments of having that serenity prayer. Because the reality is when things are out of my control, I go crazy. I don't like it. Don't tell anybody this, but that's why I really like to drive. Is because there's a control thing. I get to control how fast I go. I get to control when I stop. I get to control when I turn. I get to control everything about the vehicle we're going. We drove from California to Missouri, and guess what? I drove the whole way. In college, I was a part of a team called Youth Quest, and we would travel around on the weekends. Well, we did a missions trip down to Florida. It was a rough missions trip because we went to the beach. It was really suffering for Jesus. But on that trip, it was a 16-hour drive from Lynchburg, Virginia to Clearwater Beach, Florida. And guess what I did? I drove the whole way. It was awesome. And here's the thing. I didn't want to let somebody else drive because I didn't want them to be in control. I didn't like that feeling of that emotion of being in a car and me not being able to drive. This last weekend, I went for a drive with my brother and my dad, and we drove up to Don Pedro because my dad can't drive anymore, so one of the things he does love to do is go for rides. I sat in the back seat, and I hated every minute of being in that car. I was like, I'm getting car sick. What is going on? I just started playing video games on my phone. Probably where I was feeling a little car sick. But, and I just didn't know how to handle it. The reality is I wanted control. And the first thing of serenity and the Serenity Prayer is releasing control. To let go of that control that I feel like I need to have. See, step 3 tells me that I'm not God and that there's somebody out there greater than myself that can restore me to sanity. But here's how I started to deal with life is I thought I was better at dealing with the things around me than God was. This is how prideful I was. I was a youth pastor up in Alaska, and I was going to the church, and I saw some red flags as I was going up there because the senior pastor, he was the son of the pastor who was over the older folks in the church. And then his brother was the worship pastor. His other brother was the sound guy. His sister was involved in the church at some level. And that was the staff. And there was a few others, but then there was me. And here's my pride. I went, well, I'm going to go in there and change it. Don't worry. I mean, look at me. I got great control. And next thing I know, I'm coming back to California with my tail between my legs, and I'm like, those guys are idiots. And it was all because of my desire to have control, to realize that I'm not God, and he's the one that can be in control. But that's what step 3 is. And I know in my life, I have to constantly go back to step 3 and let God be in control. See, in the Serenity Prayer, it says this: God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. It's that acceptance of things that the world is accepting the things the world has to offer as they are, not as I would want them to be. It says this in the big book. It says, and acceptance is the answer to all my problems today. When I am disturbed, it is because I find some person, place, thing, or situation, some fact of my life unacceptable to me. I can find no serenity until I accept the person, place, thing, or situation as being exactly the way it is supposed to be at this moment. See, it's when I start to accept the fact that there's nothing I can do to change the governor's mind on the worthiness of how important it is for us to gather together and worship in here. I can say nothing to tell the governor about how important it is for us not to wear masks and how we can connect with our brothers and our sisters together. I have to see the visual faces and the smiles and the talking and the hearing. I have to get that to connect with fellow human beings. I mean, developmentally wise, when you don't touch or hold a baby, they developmentally stunt in growth. The same thing happens to us as human beings, but there's nothing I can say or do that's going to change the governor's mind. I can look at all the stats in the world, and I can get upset at them, but there's nothing I can say. There was a thing that went out, and it said 1 in 5 parents in Stanislaus County believe that schools should not restart. In other words, 4 out of 5 parents think that schools should start. Blows my mind what's going on, but here's the thing. I have to realize that I can do nothing to change that. But I have to accept those things. The next thing it tells me to do is to have courage. And courage is important because there's times I'm a fearful avoidant. I don't like having that confrontation, and so I'd rather run rather than deal with the situation. Courage out of Joshua chapter 1, verse 9 says this: have I not commanded you, Joshua says? Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened and do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. To realize, what do I, Scott, have charge over in my life, and what can I change? And I have to take courage to deal with those things. I can choose as a human being what I do or don't do to obey my governing authorities. I can do that. That's what I can do. What can I do to change the people around me? Absolutely nothing. but I can change how I respond and how I treat and how I behave. That's what I can change. I can't change them, but I have to have courage to do that. Now, I'm not David, but it's very much like David when he took courage as the rest of the Israelites were cowering behind rocks and tents, hiding from Goliath. He took courage to go out and throw a stone. Much like Stephen, it took courage to stand there and to say, yes, this is what I said, and I am not ashamed, as they picked up stones to stone him to death. Very much like those men of faith that took courage. It took courage for Noah to take a hammer and a nail and for like 400 years build a boat and then get on it. And then the doors close and then it starts to rain. What? Crazy. But it took courage. The next thing that it tells me is that it would give me wisdom, and that's huge. That I would have wisdom to deal with those situations, to know the difference. Proverbs chapter 2, if you want to know anything about wisdom, Proverbs is your book. Pick it and read it every single day. Proverbs 2:10 says this, for wisdom will come into your heart, and knowledge will be pleasant to your soul. There's something about working recovery and the program here that we all of a sudden someday are able to have wisdom and knowledge to deal with situations that before we never would have had an idea how to deal with. It's crazy. But not only do we have to be able to release control, but we have to realize the power of the process. There is a power of the process that happens in our life. Because it's not just one day I wake up, sex addiction gone, baby, woo! It's not just, and there's some people that this happens to. I haven't talked to too many that are successful, is they prayed and all of a sudden they never desired to drink a beer again. Never desired to do a line of Coke again. Never desired to shoot up heroin again. Never desired to eat that pizza again. But it is a process. I didn't get this way overnight and I'm not gonna get clean overnight. There is a process that has to happen for us to deal with this. It says in the prayer, it says, living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as a pathway to peace. So Matthew chapter 6, verse 34 says this, therefore do not be anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will be anxious for itself. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble. Dude, today's got enough problems as it is. Don't worry about tomorrow. Take care of today. Worry about these 24 hours, one day at a time, one moment at a time. That is huge. The Israelites understood some of this process. Exodus chapter 16, verse 31. Here's where we have the Israelites. They've left Egypt now, and they're wandering the wilderness, and the Lord is going to provide something for them because they're crying out going, where is food, God? We need food. We need some bread. I think I've prayed that a few times. God, I need some carbohydrates. I need some bread. Cheez-Its will do, but I'm just saying, give me something to eat. Although I'm saying this, Cheez-Its are the crack cocaine of food addiction. I'm just saying, it is crazy. But here's the deal. It says this in Exodus 16:31. For the house of Israel called its name manna. They walk outside and they see this substance on the ground. And they walk outside and they see it and they've been praying for bread. And they go, huh? Manna? And this is what happens. It was like coriander seed, white, and the taste of it was like wafers made with honey. And they found this substance on the ground, and guess what happens? It goes on to explain that God said, you got to pick that stuff up. You got to go through the process of making something with it. I'm not just going to provide you a loaf of bread. Oh, but guess what? It's only going to last 24 hours. It's only going to last one day at a time. And they had to go through that. Stuff in life is very temporary. Temptation is temporary. I've dealt with temptation a lot in my life. And guess what? It eventually will end. It eventually will end. Sometimes I got to distract myself, go for a run. That was when I was younger. I got to go do something. I got to play a video game. I got to go call somebody. I got to go out and talk to people. I got to do something. But that temptation eventually will go away. It will subside. It is a moment by moment basis. But here's the thing. This pathway that it talks about is that journey. It's that process. And that manna, do you know what that means? It means, what is this? What is this? How many times have we prayed for something and we've prayed that God would provide for us, and all of a sudden he gives us something else and we're going, what is this? God, give me strength to deal with my husband. Man, he's an idiot. And then all of a sudden something happens and you're like, what is this? He's being nice to me. He was being mean. What happened? Maybe you've prayed for wisdom and all of a sudden he gives you something else. Maybe you've prayed for a job and you had this great job. God, I want this. Next thing you know, you're working at Taco Bell. What is this? And there's a process. There's a process to all of this. And there is exactly what happened. This pathway is there. Now, here's the thing. That manna was only for a time, because there was a moment where that manna ceased. That manna is now, it's because it's the desert, but later it's going to be the land of Canaan. And the land of Canaan is what? It is the land of milk and honey. It is the land where there is tons of fruit. There's all this food, this abundance of it. And it may be the desert for you right now, but it's going to be the land of Canaan eventually. Don't quit until the miracle happens. Don't quit until that miracle happens. Don't stop. Keep coming back. It works if you work it, so work it because you're worth it. That is huge for us in our life. It is absolutely huge. This is earth now, but there's going to be a day where we have the inheritance of heaven. And that is huge. Not only that, but now we have not only the process and the control, but now it's the expectations. How do we deal with those expectations? It says this, taking as Jesus did this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it. Whew. Wow. How do we do that? How do we take this world as it is? Well, it's putting our expectations in check. And this is a passage where it says, it was in an article about AA, and it says this: expectations are premeditated resentments. When you find yourself feeling resentment, you can almost always trace it back to your expectations. What are your expectations on the things around you? What are your expectations for the day? Do you have an unreal expectation that you're going to go through the day without any temptation? That there's not going to be a problem? Do you go through the day thinking those things? What are your expectations? And sometimes we expect the world around us that is sinful, filled with sinners, to behave like saints. Where's our expectations on that? Well, the question is, what would Jesus do? I remember that big old movement. It was in the 90s, WWJD. Everybody had their bracelet. Everybody had their necklace. Everybody had their T-shirts. They were blinging it. And paparazzi had their own little, their own thing on it. But WWJD. And here's two passages of scripture that I found today about how Jesus was hanging with sinners and how he dealt with it. Mark 2:17 says this. It says, and when Jesus heard it, he said to them, those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick, I came not to call the righteous, but the sinners. Jesus was hanging out with the sinners. He literally just met with Matthew, a tax collector, the nastiest, crummiest, scummiest people in the Israelite community, and he says, follow me. Calls them into discipleship. They go have a meal together, and there's all these other tax collectors and sinners hanging out. And then the Pharisees show up and go, dude, what are you doing? God had a heart for everybody, and he desired for them to come to know him. He desired for their salvation. And the same thing for us. That's how he took the world. He didn't expect sinners to not behave like sinners. He took everything like it was, as is. So what I love about recovery, we have acceptance here. You walk in the rooms and you share some of the craziest stuff in open share group, and we accept you for who you are. We don't say, oh, that's gross, get out. But we accept you for who you are because we love you and we care about you. The next story is John chapter 12, verse 3. We have this woman named Mary who shows up on the scene, and the belief was that she previously was a prostitute. And here's the story. She comes now, and she says, therefore Mary took a pound of expensive ointment made from pure nard and anointed the feet of Jesus and wiped his feet with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. He's sitting at the table with these Pharisees. A sinner comes in and anoints his feet, wipes his feet with oil, and he accepts and receives that. And the Pharisees freak out, and later he says this, listen to me. You will always have the poor around you, but I'm going to be leaving soon. She's preparing me for my death. God accepts people for who they are and loves them for who they are and where they are, and he doesn't freak out. Not only do we need that, but we also need joy. We need joy in our life. We have, you got to release control. We got the power of the process, expectations, and joy. Trusting that you will make all things right if I surrender to your will so that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with you forever the next. Amen. That's the last stanza of the Serenity Prayer. And this comes down to surrender, guys. This comes down to us surrendering to God. This comes down to another second and third step process in our life, realizing that we're not God and he is, and letting him go in front of us. It's that surrender. It's letting go and let God. Probably one of the toughest lessons that I've had to deal with in my recovery is trusting God to do what he says he's going to do. Letting God be the one in control and not me. And there's a great book out there. If you haven't read it, it's a great book called Drop the Rock. It's a story about this guy or this lady who's carrying a rock and these character defects and is trying to swim with it, but the rock is pulling her underground and drowning her. And all you got to do is drop the rock. Drop the rock. We got all these frustrations, all these hurt, all these things, and we got to drop the rock. The rock may be expectations. You may have these expectations on how you're supposed to live, how you're supposed to do certain things, and at some point, you may have to drop the rock of that expectation and accept it for what it is, like Jesus did, and start to live a happy life, or actually reasonably happy life. See, Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2 says this, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. What is the will of God? And when we're able to surrender and offer our bodies as a living sacrifice, in other words, I'm not God, he is, I'm going to let him be in charge of me instead of me being in charge of me, because me being in charge of me got me in these rooms. I'm going to let him be in charge of me, so now he can do with me as he wills. Step 3 prayer. And now I'm going to let him start to take control. And when I do that, I'm actually able to let God show me his will. And he shows that to me, and I'm able to go through life. And when we do that, we get joy. And joy is spelled J-O-Y. Jesus before you, not you before Jesus. And too many of us are living our life, and we're more spelling it like Yoj. We got us, and we're all about us, and we care about us, and we want all these things, and we care, and we are the center of attention. Danny mentioned it, that he says, who's the most important person? He said, Scott, it's not you. But the reality is so many people in this room, because I'm like it, is I think it's me. And I live that my life, it's me before Jesus. But there's got to be that switch in our life where it's Jesus before me. And when we're able to do that, joy actually starts to happen. We're actually able to have joy in our life. Sustainable joy, not temporary joy. And when we do that, and when we accept Christ and we start to follow after him, we actually inherit the kingdom of God. And an inheritance is huge. See, 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 4 says this, to an inheritance that is imperishable, undefiled, unfading, kept in heaven for you. When we do these things, when we get to heaven, there is something that is waiting for us. That's what we're living for. We're living for Christ. We're not focused on the things of this world, but we're focused on things of heaven. And when we do that, we can have joy in our life. When we can do that, who cares if you're living on the floor of an apartment, because you have the eternal joy and you know you're going to have an apartment in the sky. You're going to have a mansion in the sky. You're going to have a place that God has already prepared a place for you in the sky, in heaven. In college, I went to college at Liberty University. In a year and a half, I had an apartment off campus, and I had a blow-up mattress for my bed, and it popped within the first month. But was I smart enough to plug it or to go get a bed? No. I slept a year and 5 months on the floor in my apartment. And here's the thing, I was a dumb college student, but I was happy. I had joy. I wasn't miserable. I took those things and I was okay. I was okay because at the time, I understood some of these principles, and I wish I could get back to some of those principles of understanding that serenity prayer. That I can put the things of the world aside so that I can be reasonably happy in this life, so that way I can be supremely happy with him forever in the next. Guys, when everything around you is robbing your serenity, it's time to say the serenity prayer, and it's time to realize that their life is insane, and we got to accept them for who they are as insane people, and we got to look at them as maybe sick and hurting and needing help. We got to reach out and help them get that serenity. But for us, let me encourage you when things are going crazy to return back to that serenity prayer and pray it over and over again if you need be. But right now, tonight, let's close our time in here with our serenity prayer. Where let's stand and let's close and say this. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as the pathway to peace, taking as Jesus did this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it. Trusting that you will make all things right if I surrender to your will, so that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with you forever in the next. Amen.